my sister asked me to watch her daughter for one night. The next day, the police showed up at my door. You are under arrest for kidnapping your sister's child. My sister shouted, "You took her without my permission." Just then, her daughter whispered, "Mom was the one who." But the sirens were too loud. It started exactly 24 hours before the raid. My cabin, in the Smoky Mountains, was supposed to be a fortress of solitude, a place where the chaotic frequency of my family could not reach me. I had bought it with the advance from my last book, paid for in cash and silence. The only sounds were the wind moving through the loblolly pines and the rhythmic scratch of my pen on paper. It was mid-July, and the heat outside was pressing against the glass, heavy and humid, but inside, the air was cool and smelled of cedar and old paper. I was finally breathing. For the first time in 32 years, I felt like I owned my own lungs. Then my phone rang. The sound was jarring in the stillness, a digital intruder that made my heart hammer against my ribs. I looked at the screen. It flashed the name Elena. My stomach tightened with a familiar, conditioned dread. It is a specific kind of nausea, reserved for the family scapegoat, the physical manifestation of walking on eggshells for 3 decades. I almost did not answer. I stared at the vibrating device, debating the consequences of letting it go to voicemail. I should have thrown it into the fireplace. I should have let it ring until the battery died. But the conditioning runs deep, deeper than logic, deeper than self-preservation. It is wired into the nervous system like a survival reflex. If I answer, I can mitigate the damage. If I ignore it, the explosion will be worse. I swiped right. Madelyn, thank God, Elena screamed the moment the connection opened. Her voice was pitched to a frequency of pure panic that I had heard 1,000 times before. It was the voice she used when she crashed her car in high school. It was the voice she used when she overdrew her bank account. It was the siren song of a crisis that required immediate intervention. "It is Mark," she sobbed, her breath hitching theatrically. "He collapsed. They think it is a massive heart attack. I am following the ambulance to the hospital right now. I cannot have Lily see him like this. You have to take her. Please, Madelyn. You are the only one I trust." I sat up, the pen rolling off the desk and hitting the floor. The logic of her statement was full of holes. Mark was 34 years old. He ran marathons. He ate kale and tracked his macros. He was the picture of health. Furthermore, they lived in a gated community with 3 nannies on speed dial, a housekeeper, and a driver. Why drive 2 hours into the remote mountains to drop a child off with the sister she barely spoke to? Why bypass the support system she paid thousands of dollars for? But panic is a contagious disease, and Elena was patient zero. She knew exactly how to bypass my critical thinking skills. She knew that if she threw enough emotional shrapnel into the air, I would instinctively jump in front of it to shield everyone else. "Where are you?" I asked, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. "I am 10 minutes away," she said. "I am dropping her at the end of your driveway. I have to go. I have to get to Mark. Don't let her have sugar. Don't let her use the phone, because she is in shock." She hung up before I could ask a single question. I stood in the center of my cabin, the silence now feeling oppressive rather than peaceful. The air conditioning hummed, a low drone that sounded like a countdown. I walked to the window, and looked out at the gravel driveway that wound through the dense trees. The heat shimmered off the stones. I should have called the hospital. I should have called Mark's phone myself. I should have realized that a woman following an ambulance does not have time to drive 2 hours into the wilderness. But I did not do any of those things, and I need you to understand why. It was not because I was stupid. It was because I was trapped in the normalizing of cruelty. For my entire life, I had been the janitor of Elena's existence. When she broke things, I glued them back together. When she lied, I corroborated her story to save our parents from disappointment. I had been trained systematically to view her chaos as my responsibility. We call it being a good sister, but it is actually a trauma response. If I fix the problem, the screaming stops. If I ask questions, the screaming gets worse. So, I walked to the door and unlocked it. I prepared myself to catch whatever mess my sister was throwing at me this time. I viewed my niece, Lily, not as a victim, but as another complication I had to quietly manage so the family show could go on. I was the designated fixer, and fixers do not ask why the floor is bloody. They just reach for the bleach. 10 minutes later, a black SUV tore up my driveway, kicking up a cloud of dust that hung in the humid air. It did not look like a vehicle driven by a grieving wife. It looked like a getaway car. And as I stepped out onto the porch, shielding my eyes from the sun, I had no idea that I was walking straight into the frame up that would end my life as I knew it. The black SUV skidded to a halt on the gravel, the tires biting into the loose stones with a crunch that echoed off the mountainside. The dust cloud caught up to the vehicle a second later, enveloping it in a choking haze of beige powder. I stood on the porch, my arms crossed over my chest, watching the scene unfold with that tightness in my throat that never seemed to go away when my sister was near. The driver's door flew open. Elena stepped out, and the first thing I noticed was the shoes. 4-inch nude stilettos. They sank immediately into the soft earth of the driveway. She cursed, stumbling slightly, before regaining her balance. She was wearing a cream-colored silk dress that looked like it cost more than my first car, and her hair was blown out in perfect, glossy waves. Her makeup was flawless. There was no mascara running down her cheeks, no blotchy redness from crying, no disheveled panic of a woman who had just been told her husband was dying. She looked like she had just stepped out of a board meeting or a brunch at the country club. The discrepancy between her appearance and her phone call was a chasm I could not cross. If Mark was dying, why was she dressed for a gala? But before I could form the question, Elena was already moving. She did not look at me. She marched to the rear passenger door and yanked it open. "Get out, Lily," she snapped. Her voice was not the sobbing, terrified frequency she had used on the phone. It was sharp, brittle, and impatient. My niece emerged from the dark interior of the car. She moved slowly, sliding off the leather seat, as if she were made of glass. Lily was 8 years old, but in that moment, she looked 5. She was small for her age, with knobby knees, and a posture that tried to fold itself inward. The second thing I noticed was the hoodie. It was mid-July in the Smoky Mountains. The air was a heavy, wet blanket of 90-degree heat with humidity that clung to your skin like plastic wrap. I was sweating just standing on the porch in a tank top. But Lily was wearing a thick, oversized gray hoodie, with long sleeves pulled down over her hands. The hood was up, casting a shadow over her face. She was staring at her sneakers, refusing to make eye contact with either of us. Elena grabbed Lily by the shoulder and propelled her toward the porch steps. "Hurry up," Elena said, checking her gold watch. "I am losing signal out here, and I need to call the cardiologist." I walked down the steps to meet them. The heat radiating off the car engine mixed with the smell of expensive perfume and dust. I looked at my sister, searching her eyes for the grief she claimed to feel. They were dry. They were wide and darting, scanning the tree line, the cabin, the road. But they were not sad. They were wild. "He is at St. Jude's, right?" I asked, reaching out to take Lily's backpack from Elena's other hand. "I can call the front desk and—" "No," Elena cut me off. "Do not call. They are busy saving his life, Madelyn. Do not tie up the lines. Just take her." She shoved the backpack at me. It was light, almost empty. Then she put her hand on Lily's back and pushed her forward. "Go with Aunt Madelyn," she said. "Be good. Do not be difficult." I crouched down so I was at eye level with my niece. The heat was flushing her cheeks, beads of sweat gathering on her upper lip, but she was shivering. "Hey, Lily," I said softly. I reached out to take her hand. It was a reflexive gesture, an offering of comfort. The reaction was instantaneous. Lily flinched. It was not a shy retreat. It was a violent, physical recoil. Her shoulder jerked up toward her ear. And she twisted her body away from me, as if she expected a blow. The movement was so sharp, so practiced, that it sucked the air out of my lungs. In that sudden, jerky motion, the long sleeve of her gray hoodie rode up her arm. Time seemed to slow down. The fabric slid back just 2 inches, but it was enough. I saw the skin of her wrist. It was not the pink, sun-kissed skin of a child enjoying summer vacation. It was a mottled landscape of deep purple and sickly yellow. I stared at it. My brain, the brain of the fixer, the brain of the peacekeeper, tried to reject the data. It tried to tell me she fell off a bike. It tried to tell me she tripped playing soccer. But physics does not lie. The bruise was not a scrape. It was not a chaotic impact mark. It was 4 distinct ovals on the inside of her wrist. It was the shape of fingers. Someone had grabbed her, hard enough to crush the capillaries beneath the skin. I looked up at Elena. My mouth opened. The question was right there, burning on my tongue. What is that? Why is she bruised? Why is she wearing a hoodie in a heat wave? But Elena was already turning away. She was checking her reflection in the side mirror of the SUV, wiping a smudge of lipstick from her tooth. "I have to go," Elena said, her back to me. "Keep her inside. Do not let her have sugar, she gets hyper. And do not let her use the phone. She is confused. She keeps saying things that are not true. It is the trauma. The trauma." I looked back at the bruise. The normalizing machine in my head kicked into overdrive. Elena is stressed, I told myself. Mark is dying. Lily is acting out. She probably tried to run into traffic and Elena grabbed her to save her. That is what happened. It has to be what happened. If I asked about the bruise, Elena would scream. She would accuse me of judging her parenting. She would storm off, or worse. She would take Lily back and leave. And if she took Lily back, who would protect the girl? I swallowed the question. It tasted like ash. "Okay," I said. My voice sounded weak, complicit. "Go. We will be fine." Elena did not say goodbye to her daughter. She did not hug her. She did not kiss the top of her head. She just got back into the driver's seat and slammed the door. The engine roared to life. A beast waking up. She threw the car into reverse, spinning the tires, and then peeled out of the driveway. The SUV fishtailing slightly before gripping the asphalt of the main road. I stood in the cloud of dust she left behind, the taste of grit in my teeth. The silence of the mountains rushed back in to fill the void, but it felt different now. It was not peaceful. It was heavy. I looked down at the child standing next to me. Lily was still staring at her shoes, her arms wrapped around her midsection, hugging herself. She was trembling. "Come on," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "Let's get you out of this heat." I turned and walked toward the cabin, hearing the soft scuff of her sneakers following me. I thought I was leading her to safety. I thought I was being the good sister, the reliable aunt. I did not realize that, as I closed the cabin door and locked the deadbolt, I was not shutting the danger out. I was locking myself in with the evidence of a crime I did not yet understand. The lock clicked into place with a sound that felt final. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door for a second, listening to the silence of the cabin. Outside, the cicadas were starting their evening saw blade chorus, but inside, the air was still and heavy. I turned around to face my niece. Lily was standing exactly where I had left her, in the middle of the braided rug, clutching her backpack straps. She looked like a statue placed in a room where she did not belong. "Why don't we get that hoodie off?" I suggested, keeping my voice light. "It is 70 degrees in here, sweetie. You must be roasting." Lily shook her head. She did not look up. She pulled the cuffs down further, until only the tips of her fingers were visible. "Okay," I said, retreating. "No problem. You keep it on if you want. How about some hot chocolate? I know it is summer, but hot chocolate fixes everything, right?" It was a stupid thing to say. Hot chocolate does not fix heart attacks, and it certainly does not fix whatever was happening in that girl's head. But I was operating on autopilot. My role in the family was the provider of comfort, the maker of pancakes, the smoother of edges. I went to the kitchenette and busied myself with the kettle. The domestic noise of water boiling and spoons clinking against ceramic mugs felt like a shield. If I kept moving, I did not have to think about the bruise I had seen on her wrist. I set the mug on the coffee table. Lily sat on the edge of the leather sofa, her feet barely touching the floor. She stared at the steam rising from the cup, but did not reach for it. "Is your dad really sick?" The question hung in the air. Lily did not answer. She did not even blink. She just stared at the brown liquid, as if it were a scrying pool that held terrible answers. I sat in the armchair opposite her, watching her. I wanted to call the hospital. I wanted to call my parents. But Elena's voice echoed in my head. "Do not tie up the lines. Do not let her use the phone." I checked my own phone. No texts. No missed calls. Just the time, glowing on the screen. 7:30. "Drink your cocoa, Lily," I said gently. "Then you can get some sleep. You look exhausted." She took a sip, her hands trembling, so much the liquid sloshed over the side. Then, as if the sugar had finally hit her bloodstream, her body seemed to crash. The adrenaline that had kept her rigid in the driveway evaporated, leaving only pure exhaustion. She curled up on the sofa, pulling her knees to her chest, still wearing the backpack. "You can take the bag off," I whispered. She shook her head again, hugging it tighter. "Fine. The backpack stays." I went into the bedroom and brought out a quilt. I tucked it around her, covering the gray hoodie. Within minutes, her breathing evened out. She was asleep. I sat in the darkening room, watching the shadows lengthen across the floorboards. The sun was dipping below the tree line, painting the room in shades of bruised purple and gray. I felt a profound sense of unease. It was not just the situation with Mark, it was the silence. Children are not quiet. Even shy children make noise. They shift, they sigh, they hum. Lily was silent as a grave. I needed to see. The urge was a physical itch. I stood up and walked softly to the sofa. I told myself I was just checking her temperature. I told myself I was making sure she was comfortable. But I knew what I was doing. I was looking for the truth I had been too cowardly to ask for in the daylight. I knelt beside the sofa. Lily was deeply asleep, her mouth slightly open. I reached out and very gently took her left hand. It was limp. I slid my fingers under the cuff of the gray hoodie. "Please be wrong," I prayed. "Please let it be a shadow." I pushed the fabric up to her elbow. The breath hissed out of my teeth. It was not just the wrist. Her forearm was a canvas of violence. There were old bruises, faded to a sickly yellow, green, and new ones that were a terrifying, angry black. But it was the pattern that made my stomach turn over. They were grab marks. Distinct, oval impressions where fingers had squeezed too hard. And further up, near the elbow, there was a circular burn, small and red, like the tip of a cigarette or a curling iron. I sat back on my heels, the room spinning. My brain, conditioned by 3 decades of gaslighting, immediately tried to rewrite what I was seeing. She fell climbing a tree. My mind whispered. She got into a fight at school. Elena is just stressed. She grabbed her too hard once to stop her from running into the street. But the burn. How do you explain a burn on the inside of an arm as an accident? I looked at Lily's face. In sleep, the tension had left her brow. And she looked so much like me at that age. I remembered being 8. I remembered breaking a vase in the hallway. I remembered telling my mother the truth, that Elena had pushed me into it. And I remembered my mother slapping me, not for the vase, but for lying about my sister. "Elena is good," my mother had said. "Elena is the sunshine. You are the shadow, Madelyn. Stop trying to drag her into the dark." I had learned then that truth was not a defense. Truth was a provocation. I pulled the sleeve back down, covering the evidence. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, my hands shaking so badly, I had to grip the edge of the counter. I should call the police. That was the rational thought. I should pick up the phone and dial 911. But then the other voice spoke up. The voice of the scapegoat. "If you call the police and you are wrong, they will never forgive you. You will destroy the family. Mark is dying. Elena is alone. Do not add to the chaos." I looked at my phone. It sat on the counter like a dormant grenade. I did not call the police. I did not call the hospital. I washed the mugs. I wiped the counters. I swept the floor. I did what I always did. I cleaned. I tried to sanitize the mess, so that when morning came, we could pretend everything was fine. I eventually sat in the armchair, watching Lily sleep, my phone clutched in my hand. I waited for an update from Elena. Midnight came and went. The moon rose, casting long, skeletal shadows through the pine trees outside. I must have dozed off. My head fell back against the chair, and I drifted into a fitful, shallow sleep. I dreamed of the vase shattering. I dreamed of Elena smiling, while I swept up the shards, the glass cutting my fingers, the blood dripping onto the floor, and my mother standing over me saying, "Look what you did, Madelyn. Look what you did." I did not know that while I slept, the world outside was arranging itself to make that nightmare a reality. I did not know that miles away, my parents were reading texts I had never sent. I did not know that a judge was signing a warrant. I slept in the quiet cabin, thinking I was guarding a child, unaware that I was the one who was trapped. The silence of the night was not peace. It was the deep breath before the scream. The sun bled through the loblolly pines at 7 o'clock in the morning. It was a watery, pale light that did nothing to cut the humidity already rising from the forest floor. I woke up with a crick in my neck. Still curled in the armchair, the empty mug of cocoa, sitting on the floor beside me like a cold accusation. The cabin was silent. I looked over at the sofa. The quilt was a tangled heap, but the gray lump underneath, it was still rising and falling rhythmically. Lily was asleep. For a moment, just a fraction of a second, I forgot the bruises. I forgot the bizarre exit of my sister. I felt a surge of domestic normalcy. I would make pancakes. I would make bacon. We would eat breakfast. And then I would call the hospital and find out that Mark was stable. And this was all just a terrible, overheated nightmare. I stood up, stretching my stiff limbs, and walked into the kitchenette. I reached for the bag of flour. Then, my phone lit up on the counter. It did not ring. It vibrated against the granite, a harsh, buzzing insect sound. I glanced at it, expecting Elena. Maybe an update. Maybe an apology. The screen said Mom. Relief washed over me. I reached for the phone, sliding my thumb across the glass. I prepared my speech. Mom, you have to talk to Elena. She left Lily here and she is acting strange. I opened the text. The words did not make sense. We always knew you were jealous, Madelyn, but this. You are a monster. I stared at the screen. The letters blurred. I blinked, thinking I was still asleep, thinking my brain was misfiring. I typed a question mark. My fingers were clumsy, slipping on the glass. Before I could hit send, another message popped up. This one from my father. Give her back. Do not make this worse than it already is. You are dead to us. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the counter to keep from falling. The flour bag tipped over, spilling a white dust cloud across the floor, but I did not move to clean it up. My heart began to hammer, a frantic rhythm, against my ribs. They were not asking if Lily was safe. They were not asking what happened. They had skipped straight to condemnation. It was a whisper campaign that had turned into a scream, before I even knew I was on trial. I tried to call my mother. It went straight to voicemail. I tried my father. Rejected. A third text came through, this one from a number I did not recognize. It was a link to a voicemail, followed by a string of angry emojis. I felt a cold sweat prickling on the back of my neck. What had Elena told them? Had she told them I kidnapped Lily? The logic refused to hold. Elena dropped her off. I had witnesses. No, I didn't. I was alone in the woods. I had paid for the cabin in cash. I had isolated myself perfectly for a frame-up. I looked at Lily. She was sitting up now, the quilt falling away from her face. She looked terrified, her eyes wide and fixated on the window behind me. "Aunt Maddie," she whispered. I turned around. The window, which faced the gravel driveway, was no longer showing the green of the forest. It was flashing, blue, red, blue, red. The colors washed over the cabin walls, turning my sanctuary into a cheap disco of violence. The noise hit me a second later. It was not the wind. It was the heavy crunch of tires on gravel, the slam of car doors, and the crackle of a megaphone. "Madelyn Vance. This is the police. Come out with your hands up." I looked at Lily. She pulled the hood up over her head and curled into a ball, making herself small, making herself disappear. I walked toward the door. I did not run. I moved with the slow, dreamlike heaviness of someone walking underwater. I unlocked the deadbolt. The door crashed inward before I could turn the handle. The wood splintered with a sound like a gunshot. I was thrown backward, stumbling over the rug. Men in tactical gear poured into the room, their voices overlapping in a wall of noise. "Clear left. Clear right. Subject secured." I felt cold metal clamp around my wrists. My face was pressed into the floorboards, inhaling the dust of the spilled flour. I did not fight. I went limp. People think that when you are innocent, you fight like a lion. You scream your truth until the walls shake. But that is not what happens when you are the family scapegoat. When you have spent a lifetime being told that your reality is wrong, that your feelings are invalid, and that you are the problem, your brain is wired differently. When the collective finger of authority points at you and says, "You are the villain," a broken part of you simply accepts it. "Get her up!" Someone shouted. They hauled me to my feet. I saw a female officer kneeling by the sofa, talking softly to the pile of quilts that was Lily. Lily was screaming now. It was a high, thin sound that tore through the chaos. "I am sorry," I whispered, though I did not know what I was apologizing for. They dragged me out onto the porch. The heat of the morning hit me like a physical blow. The driveway was filled with police cruisers, and there, standing by the lead car, was Elena. She was not in handcuffs. She was wrapped in a blanket, despite the 90-degree heat, sobbing into the chest of a uniformed officer. She looked up as they brought me out, her face twisted into a mask of pure, performative agony. "You monster!" she screamed, lunging toward me, held back by the officer. "Tell them where you hid her!" I stared at her. I stopped walking. The officer shoving me forward grunted, but I dug my heels into the dirt. "She kidnapped my baby!" Elena wailed, her voice cracking perfectly. "She has always been jealous!" I looked at my sister. I looked at the performance of a lifetime. And I realized, with a clarity that cut through the shock, that she had not just come to get Lily back. She had come to destroy me. The bruises on Lily's arms, the silence, the hoodie. It was all collateral damage in a script she had been writing for years. My sister shouted, "You took her without my permission!" Just then, behind me, the female officer led Lily out of the cabin. Lily stopped. She looked at her mother, then at me. Lily whispered something. It was so quiet the wind almost stole it. Mom was the one who, but nobody heard her. The sirens were too loud. The accusations were too heavy. The officer shoved me into the back of the cruiser. And the heavy door slammed shut, sealing me inside a box of stale air and plexiglass. I watched through the window as Elena ran to Lily, burying her face in the hood, smothering the child's words before they could be spoken again. I sat in the dark, wrapped in the cold comfort of the inevitable, while the real monster stood weeping on my lawn. The interrogation room was a sterile box of gray walls and buzzing fluorescent lights. It smelled of stale coffee and fear, a sharp, metallic tang that coated the back of my throat. The transition from the sweltering heat of the Smoky Mountains to this meat locker temperature had left me shivering uncontrollably. My hands were cuffed to a metal ring on the table, the steel biting into my wrists every time I shifted. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the two-way mirror. I knew they were watching. I could feel their eyes, heavy and judging, pressing against the glass. My parents were likely on the other side. Elena was likely there, weeping into a tissue, spinning her narrative of the unstable, jealous sister who finally snapped. The door opened with a heavy, pneumatic hiss. A man walked in. He was not the screaming officer from the raid. He was older, wearing a rumpled suit that looked like it had been slept in. He carried a manila folder and a laptop. He sat down across from me, the metal chair scraping loudly against the linoleum floor. "Detective Vance," he said. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. He did not introduce himself further. He did not offer me water. He simply opened the folder and began laying out photographs on the metal table, like a grotesque tarot reading. Photo 1. It was a grainy picture taken from a distance, likely by a neighbor's cell phone or a trail camera. It showed me standing in the driveway of the cabin, reaching for Lily. From the angle, it did not look like I was offering a hand. It looked like I was dragging her. "Witnesses say you forced the girl into the cabin," Vance said, tapping the photo. "That does not look like a hug to me, Miss Vance. That looks like abduction." I opened my mouth to explain. I wanted to tell him about the heat, the hoodie, the fear in her eyes. But he was already laying down the next image. Photo 2. This one was high definition. It was a close-up of Lily's arm. The sleeve of the gray hoodie had been pushed up to reveal the map of violence I had seen the night before. The purple fingerprints, the yellowing bruises, the small, circular burn. "The mother claims you inflicted these," Vance said. "She told us you have a history of aggression when you do not get your way. She said you grabbed the child because she was crying for her father." My stomach lurched. The audacity of the lie was breathtaking. Elena had taken the very evidence of her own cruelty and weaponized it against me. "I did not do that," I whispered. My voice was a rusty scrape. "She had those when she arrived. That is why she was wearing the hoodie." Vance did not look up. He did not blink. He opened the laptop and turned the screen toward me. "We have a recording, Madelyn. Sent to your sister's phone at 6 this morning." He pressed play. A voice filled the small room. My voice. "I have your daughter. If you want to see her alive again, wire $500,000 to the offshore account I sent. If you go to the police, I will finish what I started. Do not test me, Elena." I stopped breathing. The cadence, the pitch, the slight rasp I get when I am tired. It was perfect. It was undeniable. It was me. But I had never said those words. I had never demanded money. I had never threatened a child. I looked at the detective, and for a terrifying second, the world fractured. The invisible chains of the survivor tightened around my chest. My brain, wired by decades of gaslighting, simply accepted the narrative. Of course I was the villain. I was always the villain. The gaslighting had been so thorough, so decades long, that for a split second, looking at that detective, I wondered if I had done it and just forgotten. That is the true power of abuse. It does not just hurt you. It makes you doubt your own existence. Vance leaned forward. The space between us felt charged with electricity. We are looking at aggravated kidnapping, extortion, and child abuse. In this state, that is a life sentence. No parole. You die in a cage, Madelyn. Unless you tell me where the money was supposed to go. The words life sentence hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I did not do it. I said again, but it sounded like a question. Vance sighed, a sound of profound disappointment. He closed the laptop. Right now. Your sister is crying in the lobby. Your parents are giving statements about your unstable behavior. And your niece is too terrified to speak. You are alone, Madelyn. He stood up and walked to the door. Think about it, he said. You have an hour before I book you. The door slammed shut. The lock engaged with a heavy thud. I was left alone in the buzzing silence, staring at the reflection of a monster in the two-way mirror. While the walls of the box closed in around me, I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to hold the pieces of my mind together. But the cracks were spreading too fast to stop. I stared at the gray metal table, the surface scratched by the handcuffs of 1,000 other desperate people. For the first time in 24 hours, the fog in my brain began to clear. The paralysis of the scapegoat, that conditioned reflex to freeze and accept the blame, shattered under the sheer weight of the accusation. This was not just my family being mean. This was not just Elena needing attention during a crisis. This was a calculated, architectural dismantling of my life. I closed my eyes and forced myself to replay the recording in my head. Not the voice, which was a terrifyingly perfect clone of my own, but the words. Specifically, the number. $500,000. Why that amount? If you are going to fake a kidnapping for ransom, why stop at $500,000? Mark was an investment banker. He could liquidate millions if pressed. A desperate kidnapper would ask for $1 million or $2 million. But $500,000 was specific. It was a ceiling. It was a debt. The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. Last Thanksgiving, Elena had cornered me in the kitchen while I was drying dishes. She had been manic, her eyes too bright, her movements jerky. She had asked to borrow $10,000. She said it was for interest on a credit card. She said she had gotten into online gaming. I had given her the money, of course. I always gave her the money. But later that night, I had seen her phone screen. It was not a game. It was a betting site. High-stakes poker. I did the math in my head. If she had been chasing losses for a year, compounding interest, borrowing from loan sharks, $500,000 was exactly the kind of hole Elena would dig for herself. The picture snapped into focus. She wasn't just framing me. She was using me to extort her own husband. She had likely told Mark I took the girl, demanded the ransom from him directly to keep the police out of it, and planned to pay me the ransom, which she would then pocket to pay off her debts. But when the police got involved, she had to pivot. She had to make me the villain completely. It was brilliant. It was evil. And it was exactly something Elena would do. I sat up straighter. The cold metal of the table bit into my forearms. But I didn't feel the pain. I felt a cold, hard rage replacing the fear. I looked at the two-way mirror. I knew Vance was behind it. I knew he was waiting for me to break. I am going to break, I thought. But not the way you want. I took a deep breath. Detective Vance! I shouted. The door opened almost immediately. Vance stood there, looking wary. He clearly expected a confession. He expected tears. I want a lawyer, I said. My voice was raspy. But it was steady. It was the voice of the woman who had bought a cabin in cash. Not the sister who cowered in the kitchen. And I want you to check the metadata on that recording, I continued, locking eyes with him. It is a deepfake. Run a spectral analysis on the audio frequencies. You will find digital artifacts in the breath pauses. And while you are at it, check my sister's bank accounts. Specifically, look for offshore transfers or large withdrawals to online gambling sites totaling exactly $500,000. Vance paused. A flicker of doubt crossed his eyes. He was a good detective. He knew when a suspect was bluffing. I was not bluffing. He smirked, trying to regain control. We will check everything, Madelyn. But right now, your sister is crying in the lobby. Your parents are giving statements about your unstable behavior. And your niece is too terrified to speak. You are alone. He was wrong. I was not alone. I was just the only one in the room who knew the truth. Meanwhile, in the observation room next door, another drama was unfolding. I did not know it then, but the secondary twist of my nightmare was sitting in a plastic chair, sweating through his expensive gym shirt. Julian, Elena's personal trainer, the man she had been sleeping with for 6 months. Julian was 28 years old, with biceps the size of cantaloupes and a moral compass that pointed wherever the money was. Elena had promised him $50,000 if he helped her scare Mark into paying the ransom. All he had to do was drive the getaway car, if things went south, and help her plant the evidence. He was supposed to be the hero who found the car later. But when the SWAT team arrived at the cabin, Elena had not protected him. Julian sat in the observation room, listening to the feed from the hallway. He could hear the officers talking. He heard a rookie cop mention a name. Kyle. No, Julian. The guy in the tight shirt. The sister says he is the one who planned it. She says he is Madelyn's boyfriend. Julian felt the blood drain from his face. He looked at the two-way mirror, then at his own reflection. He saw the dawning horror in his own eyes. Elena had told the police that he was my boyfriend. She was tying him to me. She was cutting loose ends. And he was the loose end. She was going to send him to prison for conspiracy to kidnap, claiming he and I had cooked up the scheme together. He stood up, his knees shaking. He wasn't a criminal mastermind. He was a guy who liked fast cars and easy money. He wasn't built for prison. He certainly wasn't going to prison for a woman who would throw him under the bus to save her manicure. He looked at the door. He could hear the heavy footsteps of officers approaching. They were coming for him. Not as a witness, but as a suspect. Julian reached into his pocket. His hand trembled as he pulled out his phone. He had leverage. He had always known Elena was crazy, so he had taken out an insurance policy. He hadn't just driven the car. He had recorded everything. On his phone was a video that would shatter Elena's carefully crafted victim narrative into a million jagged pieces. The door to the observation room opened. 2 officers stepped in, their hands resting on their holsters. "Julian, stand up," one of them said. "We have some questions about your relationship with Madelyn Vance." Julian held up his hands. He held up the phone like a shield. "I don't know her," Julian stammered, his voice high and panicked. "I have never met Madelyn Vance in my life. But I can tell you who really kidnapped that girl." The officers exchanged a look. "I have a video," Julian said, rushing the words out. "I have a video of Elena in the car. She made me film it. She said it was for the ransom proof." Back in the interrogation room, I was still staring at Detective Vance. I did not know that the walls of the frame up were already crumbling next door. I just knew that I had to hold the line. "Check the metadata," I said again. "And check the gambling debts." Vance looked at me for a long moment. Then, his earpiece buzzed. He raised a hand to his ear, listening. His expression changed. The smugness evaporated, replaced by a sharp, predatory focus. He looked from me to the door, then back to me. He didn't say a word. He turned around and walked out of the room, leaving the door slightly ajar. I sat there in the silence, listening to the sudden flurry of activity in the hallway. Voices were raised. Someone was shouting. I heard the distinct sound of a woman screaming, a sound that was not grief, but pure, unadulterated rage. It was Elena. And for the first time since the handcuffs had clicked onto my wrists, I smiled. It was a small, cold smile. The sound of her screaming meant only one thing. The janitor had quit, and the mess was finally hers to clean up. The door swung open again. Vance walked back in. But this time, he wasn't holding a file of photos. He was holding a laptop. He placed it on the table and turned the screen toward me. "We received new evidence," he said quietly. "From an accomplice." I looked at the screen. I saw the interior of a black SUV. I saw my sister. And I saw the truth that was about to set the world on fire. I was led down the hallway, not to a cell, but toward the observation room. The handcuffs were still on my wrists, cold and heavy. A constant reminder of my status as a prisoner. But my head was high. The knowledge of the video, the existence of Julian, had given me a spine of steel I did not know I possessed. Detective Vance opened the door to the observation room. It was a larger space than the interrogation box, filled with chairs and a long table. And it was filled with my family. The air in the room was thick enough to choke on. My mother was sitting in the corner, clutching a tissue to her nose, her eyes red and swollen. My father stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder, his face a mask of seething, righteous anger. Mark, my brother-in-law, sat with his head in his hands, looking like a man whose world had been pulverized. And in the center of it all sat Elena. She looked fragile. She was trembling slightly, wrapped in a police issue blanket, sipping water from a paper cup. When I walked in, the performance began instantly. She flinched, shrinking back into her chair, as if my mere presence was a physical threat. "Get her out of here!" my father shouted, stepping forward. He pointed a finger at me, shaking with rage. "How dare you bring her in here? After what she did." "David, please." My mother sobbed. "I cannot look at her." Vance did not answer them. He guided me to a chair on the opposite side of the room and pushed me down into it. He stood between me and my family. A barrier of tired authority. "We are all going to watch something," Vance said, his voice cutting through the noise. He placed the laptop on the table, facing the group. He plugged in a set of small speakers. My father scoffed. We do not need to watch anything. We know what she did. She kidnapped our granddaughter. She demanded $500,000. Just book her and let us take Lily home. Just watch, Vance said. He pressed the spacebar. The video that appeared on the screen was shaky at first. Vertical footage taken from the passenger seat of a car. It showed the interior of a luxury SUV with cream leather seats. The dashboard clock read 2:15 in the afternoon. The day before the raid. The camera focused on the back seat. Lily was sitting there, looking small and terrified. Elena was leaning over her from the driver's seat, but she was not comforting her child. She was holding a makeup palette. Hold still, Elena's voice said. It was sharp and cold, the voice she used when a waiter brought the wrong wine. The video showed Elena dabbing a sponge into a dark purple cream. She grabbed Lily's wrist. Lily tried to pull away, whimpering. I said hold still. Elena snapped. She applied the makeup to Lily's arm, blending it aggressively to create the appearance of a deep bruise. If you do not stop moving, I will give you a real one. Do you understand? On screen, Lily nodded, tears streaming down her face. Now, practice the line, Elena commanded. What do you say to Daddy? Lily's voice was a whisper. Aunt Maddie took me. Louder, Elena shouted. And sound scared. If you do not sound scared, Daddy will not pay the bad men, and the bad men will come and hurt Mommy. Do you want the bad men to hurt Mommy? No, Lily sobbed. Then do it right. Scream. The video ended with Elena sitting back, admiring her handiwork, and then checking her teeth in the rearview mirror. The screen went black. The silence in the observation room was absolute. It was a vacuum, sucking the oxygen out of the air. My father was frozen. His mouth slightly open, his finger still half raised in accusation. My mother had stopped crying. The tissue was suspended halfway to her face. Mark was staring at the blank screen, his face draining of all color until he looked like a corpse. Elena was the first to move. She let out a high, incredulous laugh. It sounded brittle, like glass breaking.
That is a deepfake,
she screamed, standing up so fast her chair tipped over. She made it. Madelyn is an artist. She knows computers. She made that video to frame me. She looked around the room, her eyes wide and manic, searching for an ally. Mom! Dad! You know me. You know I would never hurt Lily. That is not real. Look at the pixels. It is AI. My parents looked at her. For the first time in 30 years, the blind devotion in their eyes wavered. The cognitive dissonance was crashing down around them. They had spent decades believing Elena was the sun and I was the shadow. To accept this video meant accepting that they had been wrong for a lifetime. It meant accepting that they had enabled a monster. It is verified, Vance said quietly. He held up a plastic evidence bag containing a smartphone. We took this from Julian. The metadata matches the timeline. The GPS coordinates place you 2 miles from the cabin when this was filmed. And we have the text messages between you and Julian discussing the payout. $50,000 for his help. $450,000 for your gambling debts. Lies! Elena shrieked. She lunged toward Mark. Mark, baby, you know me. I love you. I love our family. She is trying to destroy us because she is jealous. She has always been jealous of what we have. Mark stood up slowly. He looked at his wife. He looked at the woman he had married, the mother of his child. And for the first time, he really saw her. He saw the desperation. He saw the calculation. He took a step back. "Don't touch me," he whispered. Elena froze. The rejection hit her harder than the handcuffs. She spun around to face me, her face twisting into a snarl.
"You bitch!"
she screamed, her voice guttural. "You ruined everything. You always ruin everything." She started to move toward me, her hands curled into claws. Vance stepped in front of her, blocking her path, but he did not have to do much. The fight was leaving her. The walls were closing in, and she knew it. Then, the door opened again. A female officer walked in, holding Lily's hand. The room went still. Lily looked tiny in the doorway. She was still wearing the gray hoodie, but the hood was down now. Her face was scrubbed clean, pale, and exhausted. She looked at the room full of adults. She looked at her father, who was openly weeping. She looked at her grandparents, who looked like statues of regret, and then she looked at Elena. Elena's face transformed instantly. The snarl vanished. The manic fear smoothed out. She dropped to her knees, opening her arms wide. It was a reflex. The camera was rolling, so the actress hit her mark. "Lily!" Elena cried, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "Oh, my baby! Mommy is here!" "Come here, sweetie, come to mommy. It is okay now. The bad auntie cannot hurt you anymore." She reached out. Lily stood frozen. She looked at her mother's outstretched arms. Those arms that had held her, and pinched her, and painted bruises on her skin. She looked at the smile that hid the teeth. "Come here, baby," Elena cooed, a hint of steel entering her voice. "Come to mommy right now." The command hung in the air. For a moment, I thought she would go. The conditioning of a child is a powerful thing. Fear is a powerful tether. I held my breath, my heart hammering against my ribs. I did not speak. I did not beg. I simply sat there, handcuffed and silent, and waited. Lily took a step, but not toward Elena. She turned her body. She walked past her father. She walked past her grandparents. She walked straight to the chair where I sat. She buried her face in my shoulder. I could not hug her back, because my hands were cuffed to the table, so I just leaned my head against hers. I felt her small body shaking. I felt the wetness of her tears soaking into my shirt. The sound in the room was deafening in its absence. Elena's arms were still open, grasping at empty air. Her smile faltered, then collapsed into a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. Lily turned her head slightly, just enough to look at the detective. Her voice was small, but in the silence, it carried like a bell. "Mom was the one who hurt me," she whispered. "She said she would kill Aunt Maddie if I did not lie. The truth, spoken by a child, has a weight that no lie can withstand." It shattered the last remnants of Elena's reality. My father made a sound like a wounded animal. He sank into a chair, putting his head in his hands. My mother put a hand over her mouth, staring at Elena with horror. Mark walked over to Elena. He did not yell. He looked down at her, his expression cold and final. "It is over, Elena," he said. Vance nodded to the officers. "Book her," he said. 2 officers moved in. They pulled Elena to her feet. She did not go quietly this time. She screamed. She thrashed. She spewed profanities that would make a sailor blush. She blamed me. She blamed Mark. She blamed the world. But as they dragged her out of the room, her heels scraping against the linoleum, nobody looked at her. Our parents said nothing. They could not look at me. They could not look at Lily. They were trapped in the wreckage of their own making. Realizing too late that they had spent 30 years protecting the wolf and punishing the sheep. Vance walked over to me. He produced a small silver key. "I am sorry, Miss Vance," he said quietly. He unlocked the cuffs. The metal fell away with a clatter. I rubbed my wrists. The skin was raw and red, but the weight was gone. I wrapped my arms around Lily, pulling her into my lap, holding her tight. She clung to me, her small fingers digging into my back. I looked at Mark. He was looking at us, tears streaming down his face. He nodded, a slow, solemn acknowledgement. He knew. He finally knew. I looked at the empty doorway, where my sister had been dragged out. The scream of her denial still echoed in the hallway, fading into the distance. I took a deep breath. The air in the room was still stale, still smelling of coffee and fear, but for the first time in my life, it tasted like freedom. I was not the fixer anymore. I was not the scapegoat. I was the one who was left standing. It has been exactly 1 year since the raid. The cabin looks different now. I finally cut down the overgrown laurels that choked the front porch. Letting the sunlight reach the floorboards, where the police had once dragged me out in handcuffs. I painted the front door a bright, defiant yellow. It is no longer a fortress of solitude designed to keep the world out. It is a home. The wind still moves through the loblolly pines with that familiar rushing sound, but it no longer sounds like a warning. It just sounds like the wind. Justice, I have learned, is a slow and grinding machine. It does not happen with the bang of a gavel, but in the quiet, paperwork-filled months that follow the screaming. Elena pleaded guilty. There was no trial. No grandstanding performance for a jury. The evidence Julian provided, combined with the metadata and the financial records of her gambling debts, was a weight too heavy, even for her narcissism to bench press. The judge sentenced her to 15 years in a state penitentiary. I did not go to the sentencing. I did not need to see her in an orange jumpsuit to know she was gone. The silence she left behind was proof enough. Mark filed for divorce 3 days after the arrest. He came to the cabin only once, about 2 months later. He looked 10 years older. His hair graying at the temples. His shoulders slumped under the weight of a guilt that will likely never fully evaporate. He sat at my kitchen table, drinking coffee, and pushed a stack of legal documents toward me. "I cannot do it, Madelyn," he had said, his voice breaking. "Every time I look at her, I see the bruises. I see how I missed them. I see how I let it happen, because I was too busy working, too busy believing the lie. She deserves to be with the one person who actually saw her." He signed over full custody of Lily to me, without a fight. He provides for her financially, and he visits her under supervision. But he knows what I know. He is rebuilding himself. But he is not a foundation she can build on yet. Then there were my parents. They tried, in their own broken way, to rewrite the narrative one last time. They sent letters. They left voicemails. "We didn't know," they said. "We were manipulated too. We are a family, Madelyn. You cannot just cut us off." But that is the thing about the truth. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. They didn't know because they chose not to look. They preferred the beautiful lie of the golden child to the inconvenient reality of her abuse. They wanted peace at the cost of my safety, and then at the cost of Lily's. I did not write back. I did not argue. I simply had my lawyer serve them with a permanent, no-contact order. It was the final act of the janitor. I swept them out of the door, and then I changed the locks. Now, the cabin is filled with noise. I used the settlement money from the lawsuit against the county for the wrongful arrest, along with the funds Mark provided, to build an extension on the back of the house. It is an art studio, with floor-to-ceiling windows that look out over the mountains. I am sitting there now, wiping cerulean blue paint off my hands. Across the room, Lily is working on a canvas that is almost as big as she is. She is 9 years old now. She has grown 3 inches. The hollow, haunted look is gone from her eyes, replaced by a fierce, bright curiosity. She is wearing a shirt covered in paint splatters, and there is a smudge of yellow on her nose. She is not quiet. She is humming a song from the radio, off key and loud. She drops a brush and laughs when it splatters on the floor. She talks to herself as she mixes colors, debating the merits of green versus teal. For years, I thought my job was to absorb the sound, to be the silence that balanced the chaos. I thought that being a survivor meant making yourself small, making yourself invisible, so the monster would pass you by. I was wrong. I watch Lily attack the canvas with broad, confident strokes. She is not afraid of making a mess. She is not afraid of being wrong. She is not afraid that if she makes a sound, someone will hurt her. That is the real victory. It is not the prison sentence. It is not the legal documents or the bank accounts. Justice is the sound of a child who is no longer afraid to make noise. Lily turns to me, her eyes shining. "Look, Aunt Maddie!" she shouts, pointing at her masterpiece. It is a chaotic explosion of color, bright and wild and unapologetic. I smile, and for the first time in my life, I do not feel the need to fix anything. It is perfect, I say. And it is.